Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. I hope everybody's doing great out there.
Hello and welcome back.
Welcome back. So this is Panov Alexander Dmitrovich. So he was born on June 11th, 1958. He's over in the Russian Federation. Both his parents were scientists. He's a doctor of physics and mathematics. He's a physicist and astrophysicist. He has authored 137 papers and 1 monographs. And obviously, this is a very, very well-educated, well-versed man. And you see here, he's all about atomic nuclear physics, chemistry, quantum chemistry at that. This is a smart guy.
I wouldn't argue with him.
No, I mean, he's got quite a background here. And you can see some of his articles here, such as post-singular evolution, post-singular civilizations, evolution of big history perspective. Fascinating stuff. Evolution from the Big Bang to nanorobots. Pre-biological panspermia and the hypothesis of self-consistent galaxy origin of the life. Good reads. Very, very good. So, what's up with him and why are we pointing him out? Because he says Earth is an alien experiment.
It explains a lot.
It sure does. We've talked about it. How could God make a noise walking in the Garden of Eden unless he actually had a physical body? What type of God are we talking about? And then when we look at the Sumerian records, well, very, very physical beings. Again, we talked about how can angels mate with female beings from a human species. Of course, if they're biological beings, yeah, it makes sense. So, of course, we've been tainted by our religious perspective, and perhaps our religious perspective has been given to us by these beings to keep us in the dark.
I think that's very much the case.
That more than
Sums it up.
it more than goes along with the left brain. It feels good in the heart. It feels right. It most definitely does when we open up our minds. So, as that old question, are we alone in the universe? And the answer is, of course not. I mean, how could we possibly be alone in this gigantic enormity of creation?
No, once you stop to really think about it, it's kind of a ridiculous thought to think we're alone.
Absolutely. It's very, very egotistical in some ways to think that everything was just made for us. Life abounds in the universe. And again, Alexander Panov is a top scientist at the Institute of Nuclear Physics at Moscow State University. And he's the leader of the SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Scientific and Cultural Center, under the Council of Astronomy of the Russian Academy of Sciences, chairman of the Life and Mind in the Universe Department of the Council on Astronomy of RAS. And he told Russian state media outlet that the reason humans haven't formally been introduced to alien civilizations is that we're just an experiment.
It kind of makes sense,
Yeah, an experiment, or perhaps it's the fact that the controllers are wanting to remain anonymous, are wanting to stay out of the mix, or don't want themselves to be discovered as being controllers. When we look at it, what did the Roman Empire do when it conquered? Well, it's not just the Roman Empire. We could look to the Persian Empire. We could look to Xerxes and Darius the Great. What they did was they either conquered a people, came to an agreement that they were going to rule the people. They moved on, conquered another land, but they had their puppets in place that were carrying out their will, and they were taking the natural resources, and they were taking their taxes, their dues, so to speak. Is that not likely that that's exactly what's happening on this planet?
So it just seems like the same story keeps happening over and over and over.
Yeah, when we see the model of Western civilization, it's the model that comes out of Sumeria, and it's just basically progressed on down the line through the various empires, including the Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire, and the American Empire. It's just a continuation of basically putting puppets in charge at the top levels that are really, they're really answering to somebody that's not exactly Homo sapiens sapiens.
Right. And the real controllers make sure they stay far out of sight because it would kind of ruin the whole experiment.
Exactly. And so Alexander Panov, well, he gets that fact that there's something going on here and that, humans don't really run this show. I mean, we could look at this from so many different angles. We could look at it from, modern day abduction experiences. We could look at it from all the people that have come out and just said this, like Paul Hellyer, who was a Canadian prime minister, who comes straight out and says, yeah, we're interacting with many different species of extraterrestrials. They have deals with our governments. Of course, we've all heard about Roswell. We've heard about Eisenhower meeting with the ETs as well. We could go on down the line. There's been so many different well-documented abduction experiences. We have the work of John Mack, who has regressed people in hypnosis and found out that they were part of their traumas that they've been abducted. And that's why they're having these issues that's deep down in their mind. It's that trauma of being abducted and having experiments done on you. And we could look at things like we could go look at the Nazca lines, which can only be seen from way up in space, as if somebody was trying to get somebody's attention. There's crop circles, some of which man-made, some of which aren't man-made. I've seen some in which tiny little orbs, little metallic round orbs, are actually making the crop circles. And then we could go into, of course, the Sumerian legends themselves that say that humanity was created in order to do the work of the gods, because the Igigi, who were doing the work for the Anunnaki, rebelled and refused to do the physical labor. So a new species was created, and there's hundreds of thousands of those cuneiform writings. Tons and tons of evidence. You could go on down the line where you could talk about the legends of all the different indigenous peoples of not just the Americas. The Dogon tribe says, the same thing. The Dogon tribe over in Africa will talk about, basically Pleiadians, but also what we would call Draco, as well as other beings out there. We have the Hopi talking about it, the Cherokee talking about it. We have the Paiutes talking about them. It goes all over the world. The evidence is just absolutely overwhelming, and if somebody can't see that, it's just because they want to have a certain dogma, and it'll crush their worldview because they're betting on just one thing, and they're hoping that that reality is the reality. But the evidence is just completely overwhelming that there's ETs out there, and we're seeing them now, and the government's even admitting that. Do we trust the government? No, but we see things with our own eyes as well, and we've had experiences, and these experiences go back throughout the ages. And so when we look at things like this, we see, of course, we're not alone. Russian scientist says we're using the wrong tools to hunt for aliens. Well, as you're looking at a Dyson sphere there, which would be of a higher level civilization than ours for sure, in order to harness the power of the sun of a particular solar system. This would be a much more advanced civilization than what we have, but perhaps we have a civilization that's that advanced that is actually running the show, that can actually move planets from one place to another, actually move the sun, move the whole solar system. When you think about beings that would be perhaps tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years ahead of us technologically, obviously they would look like gods. And then we jump over, and if you go into the Puranas and all the different Hindu texts, you will see it just comes straight out and says there's 432,000 humanoid races in the multiverse. Humanoid races, there's tons of life out there. And they're actually categorized. You could go into Wiki and look at them. This was just common knowledge, as we said, and there's a reason why all this has been suppressed. Our friend David over at DAP 2030 did a video yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, and he was talking about history being rewritten again because they've wanted to make it look like the Sumerian the Sumerian civilization is the oldest, and everything comes from that. But in reality, it's more the Indus Valley civilization that is the oldest. And the Indus Valley civilization is the one that tells us that there's a lot of different beings out there, that they fly around in spaceships called Vimanas by them, and they actually fight amongst each other. And some of them, which they will call the Asuras, they're viewed more in a demonic perspective, because they just would come down and they would just take over a people, and they would just rule the people and use the people as slaves. So, in my mind, when we're talking Asuras, we're talking the Anunnaki, we're talking the beings that were ruling the Sumerians, and eventually went and spread out and gave us this series of empires. And perhaps they're still there. They're just letting us police ourselves. They're letting the leaders of this planet police ourselves, as long as we stay in line. There is evidence of massive mining all over the world, massive mining, and not just in South Africa, as Michael Tellinger has exposed, mines that are hundreds of thousands of years old, which Homo sapiens sapiens would not have the capability of, making.
Exactly. I mean, there's just too much evidence to dismiss. Too many things you would have to say, no, that's not right. That's all wrong, and that's not possible.
Yeah, it's just overwhelming. And now we have, top level scientists coming out and saying that. Well, we've known all along. We have these reliefs which show these tall gods that are probably 8 to 10 feet tall, I would say here, some taller than others. And we have the humans right here, and they're tied up like slaves. Their arms are tied behind their back, and they're tied by their necks. And we have a flying machine overhead. So it's really, really clear. And then, of course, we have all these reptilian type of sculptures, as well as, again, legends of inner earth reptilian beings. So perhaps some of them are ruling from up and above, and perhaps some are ruling from inside the earth. Interesting how we think that Satan, is inside the earth, where it's all brimstone and hellfire.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you can draw a lot of parallels between, the information we're looking up here and stuff that's in the Bible.
Exactly. And again, there's so many layers to things. You could take things in so many ways, because you could say, well, you could view it like Satan is somebody we contend with every day, because it's a darker side of us. That's an obvious thing we could look into. It's the darker tendencies, the greedy, egotistical tendencies. We could view it as the battle with Satan is the battle with the ego, very simply put, as opposed to, the more godly angelic side being that of the greater good of all, and having that first and foremost in your mind and in your heart. I really find it kind of amazing that people can really believe there's just one single individual named Satan, but then, you got to go deeper. There's so many ways you could take things. Now, Satan means the adversary. Now, who is the adversary of humanity? Well, if we're looking at it from the Sumerian tales, wouldn't it be the overlords that are keeping humans as slaves? It could be viewed as the entire system is the adversary that we find ourselves in on this planet. So there's many different ways of looking at it. Of course, we could pick out the Draco, the reptilians, the Anunnaki, the Greys. These are all adversaries of humanity if they are truly subjecting humanity to an imprisonment in a slave life, if that's what's really going on here behind the scenes.
There's just so many things going on behind the scenes to take into consideration. So hopefully this helps somebody.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating. And again, the evidence is completely overwhelming. So as we have this disclosure going on, and we will see these beings, and no, they're not fallen angels. But, again, well, you could say they are fallen angels, because angel means messenger.
Yep.
And fallen in the fact that they come out of the sky and come into the ground. So you could view it that way. Were they fallen angels at Roswell? Well, they crashed, and they're on the ground, and perhaps they're a messenger of some sort for some massive corporation out there, a galactic corporation that's mining the planet and utilizing the indigenous people of the planet. Think over to Avatar, the movie Avatar. Here you have these beings that come in. There's other beings living in perfect harmony with the planet that they're on, living in a very symbiotic relationship with the planet. And then what do you get? Well, you get this system coming in the form of humans with technology that are all about mining the planet, and they just start destroying everything. That's a really familiar tale that we hear echoing throughout time.
It is. And now that humans are starting to awaken, it's almost like things are starting to unravel, and they come in with all this chaos to ratchet us back down. So we, can't really go within and help ourselves evolve.
Exactly. Yeah, the answers lie within. You have to spend the time in deep meditation and let things come to you. You have to still the chatter. Yeah, it's not about, taking in any particular knowledge, but contemplation on that knowledge. And, that's why we tend to spend a couple hours a day minimum, going within, because it leads to understanding and gnosis. Again, there's a reason why the Gnostics were persecuted, because Gnostic Christianity was wiped out by the official church of Constantine, the wife killer and son murderer, that used Christianity as a religion to consolidate his power over his people. But that has been done, from time immemorial as well. And if the Gnostic line of thinking had dominated, where you don't need to go through a priest, you don't need to go through a church, it's all about gnosis. It's all about you having a direct experience from going within, just like it is in the Hindu tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, in the Jain tradition, and so many other traditions, Taoist as well. It's all about going within. That's where you will discover Source, God, Prime Creator, because it's right there inside you. So those that are waiting for the return of quote-unquote God with the big G, what might return will be a God with a little g, because God with the big G never went anywhere. That's inside of each and every one of us. How could God be omniscient, right, omnipotent, and omnipresent if it wasn't inside of every living being?
And we are all a very unique and beautiful expression of Source.
Think about that. That's just very, very self-evident truth. Because, and then, if you were just viewing God as God the Father, you're throwing out half of the whole picture, more than half, because it's through the feminine energy that things manifest in this realm. And so, again, studying Taoism, the yin and the yang, you can't have one without the other. It takes both to create this reality that we see around us.
Yeah, and they tend to just sort of circle everything around one being.
So, and again, when we look at that, we look at the yin and the yang symbol. There's a little yin in the yang, and there's a little yang in the yin. And this dynamism is what manifests this universe, but still, that's not the totality of God with the big G, Source, because that's beyond that. So very interesting stuff, but I love it when we see these things and we see more and more scientists coming straight out and saying, well, in my conclusion, things don't add up. It's got to be extraterrestrials and interdimensionals.
Exactly.
So guys, thank you for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. We couldn't do it without you. As always, namaste and God bless.
Namaste.